So moving on to our second presentation, introducing Matthew Bruce, Matt, who is doing his PhD in modern languages. So Matt is a fourth-year part-time PhD student in French studies at the University of Birmingham under Dr. Andrew Watts and Professor Kate Inke, and his thesis is entitled, hopefully I don't murder the French, Les plaisirs des modes, the portrayal of anachronistic heroes in French comedy cinema. Matthew's research looks at various characters in French comedy cinema whom he identifies as anachronistic heroes. The focus of today's presentation is the French OSS 117 film trilogy and the influence of the universally recognized James Bond series and the socio-cultural impact of the film's critical and public reception. The title of his presentation today is Gunning for Trouble, the socio-cultural impact of the OSS 117 and James Bond films. I'm going to hand this over to Matt now. Okay.
Thank you, Kai. The logo on screen is an internationally recognized symbol of film iconography and needs no introduction. It is, of course, the 007 logo, the code number for Ian Fleming's James Bond character, a British secret agent who has spun a series of books and films about which I've been passionate since a very young age. This journey of James Bond fandom, which has influenced my doctoral research, begins with my late mum, Jennifer, a linguist and cinephile who imbued in me a passion for languages and film. There wasn't much deliberation between us before I chose the modern languages with film studies undergrad degree at Birmingham in 2013 and continued this line in postgraduate study. Early on, my mum and dad recognised my nascent passion for James Bond and were happy to indulge it. Here is me on Christmas morning of 2002 at 7 years of age, complete with miniature tuxedo and happily ensconced in James Bond merchandise, the majority of which I've kept to this day. Many know that James Bond was the brainchild of writer Ian Fleming, who worked briefly in intelligence, using his experiences to shape his literary creation. In the 50s and 60s, his books were bestsellers, and it was a no-brainer for the Broccoli Saltzman producer team to turn them into a film series. However, 4 years before Fleming's debut novel Casino Royale, writer Jean Bruce published the first of his OSS 117 spy novels, hereafter OSS 117 in the original French, in 1949. Throughout the 50s and 60s, Bruce's novels and a series of Eurospy films would run concurrently with Sean Connery's tenure as Bond. In the recent years of so-called wokeism and its revisionist attitudes, Fleming's novels, indubitable product of their time, have made headlines on account of their offensive material around sexual politics, homosexuality, and race. Indeed, this cover here could be said to connote eroticism and/or sexual violence. Bruce's OSS novels dealt with much of the same material and were, in my view, stronger, particularly in their racist humour towards either prior colonial subjects or other Francophone territories. Similarly, this cover of a novel has a sexually charged photo of a woman of, shall we say, overseas intrigue. Fast forward to the mid-2000s and director Michel Hazanavicius resurrects the OSS character in self-satirizing spoof and pastiche modes with actor Jean Dujardin. The poster here for Lost in Rio looks knowingly at the sort of aesthetics and attitudes previously glimpsed in the artwork of the novel shown. As previously stated, much of the humour of OSS looks to address France's prior colonialist and racist attitudes, through which Dujardin acts as a conduit. On screen is a still from the clip of the film Cairo Nest of Spies, which became a YouTube hit at the time and lives on in myriad GIFs and memes. Despite the humour of the films, there are many qualities of homage, particularly in the way in which Dujardin seeks to replicate Connery's mannerisms and his oft-described cat-like way of walking. The film's publicity played on the French word connerie, or stupidity, say that the films had a little of Sean, but a lot of connerie. The OSS revival films were more or less coincident with the reboot of the James Bond series in 2006, with Daniel Craig starring in Casino Royale, which, contrary to the send-up nature of OSS, was a grittier film, dispensing with many of the frivolities associated with Pierce Brosnan's prior tenure. Such frivolities gave room for parody in the late 90s and early 2000s with the highly successful Austin Powers films with Mike Myers, which parodied Bond and similar copycat films harking back to the 60s. Following its own cultural phenomenon, the Bond producer's new reinvention was vital for the survival of the franchise. Even with reinvention, there were naturally ingredients of the Bond formula that had to be maintained, and Bond girls were no exception. This still from the first film, Dr. No, of Ursula Andress rising from the sea, is one of the most iconic in the franchise's history and film history all told. The respective producers of the Bond and OSS reboots would turn this moment on its head to reflect the very different sexual politics of their era, and making both Craig and Dujardin objects of sexual attraction for heterosexual female viewers or any viewers desirous of men, for it's long been wrongly assumed that Bond appeals exclusively to a straight audience. Online influencers such as David Lowbridge Ellis and his partner Anthony, aka Licensed to Queer, have done groundbreaking work to demonstrate how Bond appeals to LGBT people. This work appropriately nullifies Bond creator Fleming's assertion that his books are only for warm-blooded heterosexuals. Returning to OSS, many online news sites and forums have become full of vexed contributors suggesting that the films were trying to promote certain modes of behaviour instead of calling them out. Even though OSS succeeds in saving the world, a la Bond, such notions are difficult to reckon with when we use the term hero. Those of you familiar with Roger Moore's tenure as Bond will recognise the 7-foot-tall actor Richard Kiel, whom I met in 2005 at 10 years of age, famous for playing the metal-dentured villain Jaws. And as was the case for Jaws, my research today has proven that there's still much to get my teeth into. Despite pushback from certain online users about its content, the OSS series has continued undeterred, with the latest installment, From Africa with Love, coming out in 2021, directed by Nicolas Bedos, and selected to close the prestigious Cannes Film Festival that year. Back in the Bondverse, just over a month ago, the world received the highly publicised news that the Broccoli Wilson producer team had sold the film rights to Amazon after years of family ownership. This news triggered fears, despite assurances from the newly confirmed producers that the legacy would be respected. However, to quote a Bond film title, tomorrow never dies, and the franchise, like my personal fandom, will continue, safe in the knowledge that the words at the end of the last film, stating James Bond will return, are fact and not merely a supposition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. What a visually lovely and sweet way to end that. Thank you so much for that fascinating run through, really, Oz 117 and the James Bond. Really, really enjoyed that.